YouTube. Welcome to day 37 of my birthday countdown vlog. 3 more days until I turn 40. So I actually have a couple of memories still of when I was 3 years old, and these are still my memories, not just things that were recounted to me by my family. One memory was when I got my big girl bed. When I was 3, I was finally big enough to graduate from being in a crib to actually being in a big girl bed. And I still remember when it was delivered, there was, I think there must have been a power out or something, because I remember the house being all dark, and it was dark outside, and it must have been winter at the time, but they still delivered this bedroom set for me. I don't know where my family got this bedroom set. It was a pretty fancy looking thing. I don't know if someone from our local church donated it to our family, or if somehow or another my family scraped up enough money to buy it, but in my memory it was pretty fancy. There was a canopy bed, one of those princess canopy beds. And then there was a chest of drawers, and then I think there was also a matching nightstand, and it was all white with gold trim and stuff on it. I mean, obviously not real gold, just fake gold paint, but it looked really fancy to me. Even had a fancy bedspread and all that kind of stuff. And I remember it was my habit when I was a little kid to always hide under the dining room table when we had strangers over, and of course there were strangers who were delivering this bedroom set to our house. And like I said, I have this recollection of of it being dark and these strange, big, strange, burly people bringing in this bed, and then finally when the lights came back on, all of a sudden, like, oh, magic, I had this fancy bedroom set. And I also remember, I think I drove my poor grandmother crazy with that canopy bed, because I loved the canopy, but I was scared to death of it at the same time. I kept imagining it crashing down and crushing me to death, which it couldn't do. It was light aluminum with like a cloth cover on it. I mean, it wasn't going to hurt me. But I would go back and forth like, oh, I'm so scared, please take the canopy off. Oh, I miss the canopy, please put it back on. And so over the next several years while I slept in that bed, that canopy went off and on every few months because I couldn't make up my mind whether I was scared of it or not. And I remember also the first few months when I was sleeping in that big girl bed, my grandmother had not a gate, I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was basically something that you spanned up along the side of the bed so that I wouldn't fall out. The bed was actually up against a wall, so the one side I couldn't fall out because it was against a wall, but the other side she was afraid I was going to fall out. So she had this kind of a railing. She put a railing up. So basically it was a big girl bed that looked like a crib for the first few months until she felt secure that I wasn't going to fall out. And they thought that, oh yeah, they could put me in the big girl bed, and they put up the railing, and I could go to sleep. And I remember, I think it was within the first week of me in the bed, if not the very first night itself. And my mom and my grandmother were out in the kitchen playing pinochle, because they loved, at that time they played a lot of pinochle together. And I really wanted a glass of water, and I kept, calling out, Omi, Mommy, Opie, need a glass of water, and no one came. And so I realized that at the foot of my bed there was no railing, and while I was kind of tucked in a corner, there was a little bit of a wall there blocking me. There was just enough space at the foot of the bed I can climb over the footboard and get out of the bed. And so I did, and I didn't fall or hurt myself or anything. I just kind of hopped out and I waddled off to the kitchen and said, I need water. And why I remember all of this, I don't know, I just do. The other memory I have when I was 3 years old was of my father. So While I never really got to know him, he was sort of in my life a little bit the first 3 years. My grandmother allowed him to have contact with me behind my mother's back. My mother did not approve of him having anything to do with me. I know that in her mind, she was punishing him for getting her pregnant in the first place, among other things. I mean, there are all sorts of issues there. But he was a good man, and all he wanted to do was provide for me. And my mother was not allowing that, but my grandmother was like, you should be in your daughter's life. Your daughter should know you. And when I was 3 years old was the last time I saw him, and this is the only memory I have of him. I know my grandmother actually took me to his apartment in Oak Park many times from the time I was born until this last memory of mine. The only reason why I think I have this memory at all was actually because of my mother, and how traumatic the day ended up being. So while she was really mean that day, she helped cement that memory in my brain. And so I have to be grateful for that, at least. What happened that day, my dad came to pick my grandmother and I up for lunch. He always parked down the street so that people wouldn't think he was there to have any association with us. And then my grandmother would take me down to the end of the street. And I remember him picking me up and putting me up on his shoulders and then walking me to his car. And my grandmother, of course, came with. And we went out, and the part I remember was we were in a restaurant, and it was a big circular booth around a big circular table. And it was himself, it was my dad, my grandmother, myself, and another little girl. Now, I was 3. I, in my mind, thought that that girl was like 12 years old. But I have since met her again, and she was only 6. She was only 3 years older than me. But in my brain, she seemed a lot older and more mature than me, obviously. And I still remember, and I remember her name was Kim, and it turns out that Kim is the oldest daughter of my stepmother. She's not my father's daughter. She was my stepmom's daughter from her first marriage, and she divorced her first husband for whatever reasons. And when she met my dad basically kind of adopted Kim as a daughter as well, although she was 3 years older than myself. And I remember just having this wonderful time and being absolutely amazed by the waiters, and they had these big platters of plates of food, and how they would carry them and balance them. So it just absolutely, I thought it was magic. I was like, how can they do that? And I think I probably talked about it a little too much, because I do remember my dad getting a little cross with me and saying, that's enough now. We get it. It's magic, but that's enough. And I also remember that the restaurant seemed like it was very tall and had lots and lots of plants everywhere. And it turned out it was, I don't even remember the name of the hotel anymore, but it was basically a restaurant in a hotel near the Chicago O'Hare Airport. And I actually went back to that hotel for a Doctor Who convention in 1990 with my mom. And my mom and I ate in that restaurant, and I remember when we sat down in the booths, I sat there and I looked around and I'm like, I've been here before. And it just started flooding back to me. The memories, like, this is where I last had lunch with my dad. Which, of course, my mom wasn't too happy me talking about that, but I was, let's see, 1990, I was 18, 19 years old, so I mean, she couldn't do anything to me at that point. But I actually still remembered it, and then I talked to my grandmother, and she filled in some additional gaps in between what my memory actually was of the experience. the other part of the experience I remember, and I actually don't remember going to the restaurant. I don't remember coming back. Obviously, I must have sat in the car. But coming back home, and my mom somehow, for some reason, came home early from work that day, and we got back from lunch, and she saw my dad drop us off, and she was absolutely livid. And I still remember that she grabbed me by the shoulders and she shook me so hard, and she screamed at me and said if I ever saw that man again, I would have to go live with him forever, and I would never see my Omi and my Obi again, my grandparents. And I remember just being inconsolable in grief for, I don't know for how long, but for a long time. And that was the last time I ever saw him. And my grandmother told me years later that what happened was my mother actually went either to the police or got a lawyer with a judge or something like that, and got a court order basically for him to stay at least, I don't know, was it 50 yards away from me at all times or whatnot, so he could no longer come close to us anymore. And she made up some story of him abusing me or some such nonsense, which never happened. He was a good man, and since meeting my half sisters, they've confirmed this. I always knew he was a good guy. I remember him being a wonderful person and being very caring for me. And I kept that in my head, even though my mother kept trying to tell me that he was a bad person. But then I met my sisters, and my younger half sisters don't remember him very well. But my oldest one, she had, well, I'm the oldest, but the next oldest, she was about 7 when he passed away, so she remembers him really well, or well, better than I do anyway. And then of course Kim was about 14 or 15 at the time that he passed away, and they both said, yeah, he was just a wonderful father, provider, husband. Although they do remember he and my stepmom did have fights once in a while, but no, who doesn't? But he was absolutely loving to every one of his daughters, including Kim, who was his, I guess, adopted daughter. And so I'm glad that I have that memory. I'm glad that I actually, I mean, part of it, I'm sure there's bits and pieces that may have been from my grandmother, but there are definitely parts that are definitely my memories that I remember. And I'm glad that I have that memory. Today actually marks the last video where I will be recounting memories of my own. The next couple of days, the videos are going to be memories that my grandmother told me of my, when I was 2 and 1 years old. So, yes, I did remember for a long, you know, 3 years old is a pretty young age to still have memories of. I know most people don't. I'm one of the few people I know that actually can remember snippets from that far back. And those are the only 2 snippets I really remember from when I was 3. I really don't remember anything else. I mean, I have memories of my grandmother baking cookies, but she did that every year for Christmas, so who knows which years I'm remembering, and that kind of all becomes a jumble over time. But anyway, that's enough for today. Until tomorrow, bye.